we go. So again, thank you everyone for sitting in with me today. We are Pollinator Friendly Alliance. Pollinator Friendly Alliance was born around a kitchen table in Stillwater, Minnesota, and has grown into a regional and statewide conservation and advocacy nonprofit. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, right? So remember, everything in the natural world is connected. An ecosystem is a community of living things that work together and rely upon the other. So let's be good stewards of the ecosystem. I'm Laurie Schneider. I'm with Pollinator Friendly Alliance and also the University of Minnesota Entomology Department. So let's get started. I absolutely love this time of year when the natural world is just thriving, and there's so much to see and learn and appreciate and be grateful for. In my talk today, for the sake of efficiency, we'll focus on pollinators, but this can easily be translated to other wildlife such as birds. This is not your usual gardening webinar. Rather, we are at a very critical time when pollinators and other species are disappearing at a rapid rate. And it's time to protect those species before it's too late for the future of the planet and the people that will be here living after us. So we're going to learn to be good stewards in our backyard today. We'll talk about what a biodiverse backyard is, why it's important, design elements, the good bugs, and how to help pollinators. So to start with, I'd like to share a short list of things we can all do to be better stewards and create biodiversity in our home yards. An untidy landscape, rich with diversity of flowering plants, shrubs, and trees, is both beautiful and supports many species of wildlife. So if we provide just 5 key components, we can create a sanctuary right in our own backyard. Just like us, pollinators and other wildlife need a nutritious diet and healthy places to nest and raise their young. So here's my short list for a biodiverse backyard. Shelter, we need to provide food, protection from pesticides, nesting sites, and clean water. We can make it our job also to help people change their perceptions or their definition of what a desirable yard is. So let's say farewell to that manicured turf lawn and hello to biodiversity. In a world where urban sprawl and industrial agribusiness are replacing family farms, green spaces, and natural habitats, backyard habitats and urban corridors are more and more crucial to holding together an increasingly fragmented natural landscape for pollinators, birds, and wildlife. And by the way, I forgot to mention, please put your questions in the chat. The chat button should be in the little black ribbon at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to your questions at the end of the talk. Pollinators are essential for ecosystems and food systems alike. They are keystone species in most terrestrial ecosystems and crucial for biodiversity in any landscape. So pollinators are more than honeybees. Usually people think of honeybees right away and maybe butterflies. But the most efficient pollination services are a combination of all of these pollinators, especially native bees and beetles. People don't think of beetles as pollinators, but they are. Pollinators and native habitats co-evolve together. So one important role native plants play is in buffering climate change through biodiversity of organisms in the soil, plants and the root systems, and of course, biodiversity and species in general. So all species have responded to climate changes throughout their evolutionary history, but a primary concern now is the recent rapid change where species show differential movements rather than shifting together as before. Things are emerging at different times. There's two important effects at play here. One is the asynchrony of pollinators and their plants, so they're not blooming and emerging at the same time. And two is the extinction of those specialized and less adaptable pollinators like wild bees and bumblebees, for example. As an example, glacier lilies in Colorado now bloom days earlier than a few decades ago. The flowers bloom before the bumblebee queens emerge in the spring, so the flowers are not getting properly pollinated. And this bloom mismatch is also not good for the hungry bees that are emerging and find that their flower foods are in short supply. There are more than 460 known species of wild native bees in Minnesota. Thanks to citizen science, we are now just compiling important data from counts on the diversity and number of bee species not known before. There are an estimated 150 species of butterflies and skippers and thousands of moths. We already had a pretty good inventory of butterflies in Minnesota, therefore can confirm that many are endangered, threatened, or at risk, like the Karner blue and the monarch butterfly. We can help by transforming our backyards into a biodiverse plant and animal community and building corridors of habitat. Restoring and introducing native plant communities presents many other benefits as well, like natural beauty and resilience. And their deep root system acts like a sponge and filtered to help water soak down into the soil and filter out excess nutrients and pollutants. Also, a healthy backyard ecosystem supports soil and plant health for natural control of pests and disease. So we can use less chemical pesticides and fertilizers. People prefer to live in communities with healthy land and water, which also increases property values. Reducing pesticides is a key ingredient in creating safe biodiverse habitat. Household and purchase choices have direct effects on species and ecosystems, such as habitat loss and pesticide contamination. In an ongoing scientific study, we looked at native habitat adjacent to crop fields and found at least 3 pesticides and up to 22 present on each plant. Milkweeds had especially high levels, possibly because of the fuzzy large leaves that act as collection paddles for the pesticides. We also confirmed in that study that some applicators mixed many pesticides together, which can make the pesticide cocktail more lethal. Systemic insecticides such as neonicotinoids are absorbed into the plant's vascular system and expressed throughout the leaves, stems, pollen, and nectar, making the entire plant toxic to both target and non-target species, both bad and good bugs. Neonicotinoids are the most commonly used class of systemic insecticides and are in many home garden products at very concentrated levels. Many plants raised in greenhouses are treated with neonicotinoids. So be sure when you're sourcing plant materials to ask nursery if they or their suppliers treated with systemic insecticides before buying. Even if the salesperson doesn't know, it's an important question to ask so they know the consumer wants clean, untreated plants. The consumer has a lot of power here. Labeling of plants can be confusing. As you can see here, it looks like they are actually doing us a favor by treating the plant. So be sure to ask if you don't know. Most butterflies only forage a few yards from their nesting areas, which makes backyards and corridors important sanctuaries since they don't go very far. The monarch butterfly is unique in its long journey. Some other butterflies migrate short distances, and most moths, bees, wasps, and other pollinators hunker down nearby over winter. So let's talk about the elements we need to create a biodiverse backyard. An untidy yard offers much more nesting and overwintering shelter, along with other things that wildlife needs. A water source, mulch, wood chips, leaves, or compost piles are all things that are helpful for nesting. Hedgerows, trees, shrubs, flowers, of course, veggie and herb gardens. Wooden mulch piles, I'll say again because they're important. Pathways, patio, and benches for humans to enjoy all of this. A pollinator lawn and bird houses. A pond or a water feature. We'll get into more detail about these elements in a little bit. So we can create habitats in many different types of areas. In our backyards, community gardens, underutilized lots, strips between lots, and other open public or private lands, small to large, and everywhere in between. So let's look at what a biodiverse habitat looks like. Here's an example of an unused city lot. We invited volunteers from Pollinator Friendly Alliance to help with Minnesota native landscapes. Here's the before, and here's the after. So we use no pesticides in the proper maintenance of this project, and this is now a living corridor bursting with pollinators, birds, frogs, and wildlife where there was none before. When we started, the soil was extremely compacted from years of regular mowing, turf, which created a very unhealthy soil situation. We actually needed a pickaxe to dig into the soil. But after 3 years of these native plants with their substantial root system and diverse soil mycelium community, the dirt is now loose and healthy and supports life. Let's look at some more habitat ideas. This is a buffer strip installed by Shoreview natives between a front yard and the street. Notice the habitat area starts a safe distance from the road. You can't see the road, but it's off to the right here a bit, to avoid road salts. Buffer strips help filter runoff and provide borders at property lines and lawn edges. They're especially useful near streams or any kind of water body. This is a combination of flowering native forbs, warm and cool season grasses. Most wild bees are ground nesters and would find this an attractive nesting area. Some wild bees nest in stiff stems of plants or cavities or piles of mulch or wood. 70% nest in the ground, so they need clear access to soil, like this little mining bee guy. This is a semi-natural area, which defines a border at the edge of a prairie grassland in suburban Bayport and offers a variety of heights and species of grasses and plants, rocks and trees, perfect setting for the butterflies that like to sun their wings and find refuge in the grasses. I'm a big fan of hedgerows. They've been around for centuries and serve as habitat, borders, windbreaks. They reduce erosion. They're essential wildlife corridors, and especially for birds. They're often a great way to incorporate larval host plants for butterflies in shrubs, nesting sites for above ground nesting bees because there's usually soil at the base, and forage for a diversity of beneficial insects. They provide cover, food, and nesting areas for all manner of birds and greatly increase biodiversity. In a backyard, a hedgerow can be companion planted. So a variety of large shrubs with showy flowers, some colorful leaves and fruit that attract pollinators and provide food for birds. Plant a taller tree behind the shrubs and a shorter shrub next to it. Then some tall flowers like bee balm or Joe Pye weed next to one another. Some shrubs like elderberry can also grow in direct sun or partial shade. And here's a collection of flowering, fruiting shrubs. There's quite a few to choose from. Blueberry, dogwood, lilac, and currant, to name a few. We'll talk more about specific species of plants later. Trees are important first sources of pollen and also nectar throughout the year. Red maple, willow, and elm are the first sources of pollen for bees. Later in the summer and fall, nectar and fruit can be gotten from crabapple, plum, serviceberry, and others for pollinators and birds. Trees are important host plants too for butterflies and moths in particular. Here's some other tree choices. And this is one of the links I'll provide you with later, Pollinators Native Plants. It's a great resource for all sorts of lists. So the polyphemus moth, for example, lays its eggs in an oak tree in the spring, and then the caterpillars eat and develop there, and in late summer, they'll surround themselves with silk and a leaf, and they become a cocoon in the fall that overwinters, looking much like part of the brush or tree. And then in early summer, the pupae emerges as this beautiful giant silk moth. Overwintering and hibernating pollinators could easily be raked up or pruned away with the brush. Only the queen bumblebee survives. Oops, I lost my place here. The winter. So if she is unearthed or raked away, the possibility for that entire colony is gone. So please leave your leaves and stiff stems up until late spring. A good rule of thumb is after a week of consistently over 50-degree weather. Most pollinators cannot use their wings under 50 degrees. Also, pollinators emerge alongside their companion plants, so watch for blooms. Butterflies, for instance, need nectar, so they emerge later when flowers begin to appear. There are plenty of tasks we can do, such as pruning trees and shrubs, mulching and prepping veggie beds, sprouting seeds. We can also carefully trim down last season's plants if they are not hollow-stemmed. Remember the slide from earlier of the hollow stem with the leafcutter bee babies inside over here. Some plants that are hollow stemmed include bee balm, Joe Pye weed, sedum, goldenrod, bamboo. Many, many beneficial insects and pollinators over when underground or in leaf, compost, or wood piles. So let's talk about those flying flowers, the butterflies, for a minute. Good butterfly habitat provides plants for all life stages and 3 types of plants. A host plant for egg-laying and caterpillar food. Butterflies need nectar also, which provides energy for flying and reproduction, and it's food for adult butterflies. They need protected areas to pupate, rest, hide from predation, and to overwinter. Butterflies love to bask in the sun on open flowers and warm, flat rocks. So they like those big open flowers like the echinacea. They need the sun to warm their wing muscles so they can fly. Butterflies also require extra salts and nutrients from puddles, mud, or even dung for mating. This is called puddling, and these monarchs are puddling in Mexico. The key to choosing flowers for your yard is to include a variety of colors and shapes, especially for butterflies, short to tall plants, and spring to fall blooms. Some pollinators are specialists, so they need very specific plants or only one plant, like with the monarch host plant being milkweed. Others are generalists and they can utilize many different plant species. So offering a wide variety for all is ideal. Butterflies also like grasses, where they'll often hang out low in the grasses near the ground, hidden at the base when it's cold or wet out, and also away from predators. Pollinators gravitate to clumps or strips of flowers that are like colors, and a variety of heights to attract different beneficial insects and pollinators. The formula I use for choosing plants in a garden is at least 3 blooming plants per season. So three that bloom in the spring, 3 that bloom in the summer, and 3 that bloom in the fall. So let's get into the nitty-gritty with some suggested plants. And remember, I'll be providing links to all these great lists and resources later. This is just a little taste. One of my favorite plants, which is overlooked a lot, is the prairie onion. And wild lupine is the host plant for the endangered Kerner blue butterfly. Mountain mint is another of my favorites on this page, and it gets a lot of activity. It is a pollinator magnet. Spiderwort has a very open petal arrangement, so it's easy access for those very small bees like the sweat bee. And then catmint. Bee balm is another stiff-stemmed plant that pollinators can overwinter inside of. And then there's coneflower and coreopsis. There are 5 native varieties of milkweed to choose from. Here we see 3, butterfly and common milkweed being the most popular among pollinators. And of course, milkweed is the monarch's only host plant for caterpillars. New England aster and anise hyssop are 2 late blooming plants. And one of the most visited sturdy pollinator plants is the hyssop. Talk about busy plants. When the fruit trees blossom like they are now, they are alive with thousands of blooms and hundreds of pollinators busy at work. Here's a couple of flowering shrubs which provide not only nectar, but also seeds and fruit for birds and nesting areas. Oops. Joe Pyeweed offers stiff stems as well for overwintering insects and is one of those very tall, partial shade plants, good for edges and borders. And then here is the monarch's absolute favorite nectar plant, Liatris, blazing star. Don't forget grasses, bunch grasses and other types, which offer a variety of benefits. They provide nesting areas. They help hold up flowers so they are upright for us to see and also for pollinators to find. They are host plants for many of the very small butterflies like the eastern-tailed blue and the skippers. For semi-shade and shade, there are much fewer plants available than for sun. But here's a short list, so grab your cell phone and take a snap of this. Also, many shrubs do well in semi-shady areas. So let's talk about pollinator lawns for a minute. It's my dream that someday we can Replace herbicide-treated turf with pollinator lawns, habitat, and gardens. A pollinator lawn is a soft carpet of longer fescues that require less mowing and no chemicals and offer habitat and forage for pollinators. To install a pollinator lawn, we recommend scalping the turf first so that dirt shows, and then covering it with a ½ inch or more of compost, seeding liberally into the compost with clover and the grass fescue mix, aerate or rake in with a stiff rake, and then add your low-growing flowers in plugs or seeds. Cover that lightly with some seedless straw, and then you water it regularly for 2 weeks, just like you would a new lawn. And over time, you just hand weed out those undesirables and then reduce the watering over time until it's established. Here are some of the plants that are recommended for pollinator lawns. My absolute favorites are the pussy toes and the violets, but this is a complete list of the plants that I know that do well and are hardy, and you can actually walk on them. You wouldn't want to play a baseball game on them, but you can still walk across them. And leave a few dandelions, because dandelions are the first nectar plants in the spring and often the only flower for hungry pollinators when they first emerge. Check out the Lawns to Legumes State Match program if you're interested in transforming your turf into habitat. It's a state-funded program, and they will help you with seed and plant costs. If you have a bigger chunk of land, you can contact your conservation district for other habitat install support available to you. So back to our biodiverse backyard, include organic herb and veggie gardens with your backyard plan. Herbs such as thyme and oregano can be intermixed right along with the rest of the garden, and their flowers provide pollinator nectar. Use companion planting for pest control with vegetables like tomatoes and basil, squash and nasturtium, and also vegetables are great pollinator plants. The bumblebee is the primary pollinator of tomatoes, by the way, and blueberries. So let's look at a few examples of some backyard habitats. Here's a backyard in Egan. You can see they incorporate some rocks into their design. And this is a curbside. You can see the curb is right there with mostly taller plants and some grasses. Here's a backyard in St. Anthony, Maine, right up to the house. And Scandia with a larger piece of property. So remember, everything in the natural world is connected. That means your backyard too, and includes bugs. So let's talk about those good bugs, the beneficial insects, for just a minute. Beneficial insects, let's see, of the thousands of different species, insect species, they're a very small percentage. In fact, less than 1% include those that actually harm our health, homes, animals, food, and landscapes. Beneficial insects are found in many different insect orders, from beetles to true bugs, flies, wasps, butterflies, moths, dragonflies, and others. So this is a firefly. Pollinators, of course, come to mind, but many beneficial insects are predators and parasites that prey on other insects, which are considered the bad bugs. So many are scavengers, feeding and cleaning up dead and dying animal and plant materials as well, and they largely go unnoticed. So when these organisms have the habitats they need, They all work together, keeping ecosystems in balance. The firefly, for instance, as a larvae here, feeds on snails and slugs and some earthworms. The lacewing is known as the aphid lion, since they are ferocious aphid eaters. They seize them with their sucking jaws and inject a paralyzing venom. Each green lacewing larvae can devour 200 or more pests or pest eggs a week. Lacewings, lady beetles, and other insects are used successfully for biological controls instead of pesticides in greenhouses, horticulture, farms, even backyards. Wasps are some of the most beneficial insects because they are both predators of bad bugs and parasites of larvae of pest insects, and also excellent pollinators. This is the great black wasp, my favorite wasp. He preys on grasshoppers, and they are excellent pollinators. They love mountain mint, and they emerge later in the summer along with the grasshoppers that they prey upon. So I put this slide in here just because it's a big media blitz right now about the Asian great giant hornet. It's in the Vespidae family, a large, diverse, cosmopolitan family of wasps, including nearly all the known social wasps and many solitary wasps. Each social wasp colony includes a queen and a number of female workers. Hornets are actually wasps, a breed of social wasps, and they live in large, highly organized colonies. So here's what we know about the Asian giant hornet. There was one spotted in Vancouver, one in British Columbia last fall, one found dead in Washington State. They're native to Asia. Scientists expect the hornet will not find its way here for years, if it does. They live in the ground or under bases of trees. They don't like cold environments or hot environments. It's not sure how they would even do wintering over. They like forest areas. They're not interested in us. They eat other insects, including honeybees, unfortunately, larvae, tree sap, and honey. So it's important that we do not do false identifications. I've had a lot of people contact me that have seen wasps now emerging this spring and thinking they might be an Asian giant hornet. Well, they are not. They are not here. And just for an example, here are 3 wasps to compare to, and they're pretty close to their actual size. So this is a bald-faced hornet. It's about 3/4 of an inch, and they eat a lot of flies and mosquitoes. So they are one of the most defensive hornets. So you don't want to go close to their nest, but they are beneficial in that they control a lot of undesirable other insects. Here's a cicada killer. That's 1 inch long, approximately. They're a larger wasp, and they eat cicadas, and they're extremely docile. So if you were to approach one, they would run away or rather fly away. And this is the Asian giant hornet, which is the largest, of course, of all, and it's 2 inches long. It eats other insects, tree sap and honey, as I mentioned before, and it is quite a bit larger, but again, it is not here. So let's move on. I'm almost, I'm getting close to the end of my talk here, so we'll be taking your questions soon. But let's talk about how we can all help at home. And we've gone over much of this already. Plant pesticide-free plants in gardens. Replace that chemically treated turf with gardens and habitat. Show some tolerance to some insect damage, and for bee weeds like dandelions. That's an important thing we can do. Cease use of pesticides. leave gardens intact until late spring for hibernators, buy organic and know your farmer so that you can make wise consumer choices. The less pesticides used on farms, the better for all of us and our pollinators. Tell your representatives to support pollinator protections. In fact, right now, the legislature is in session, and there are some bills that are specific to pollinators. And support conservation groups, participate and follow. So learn like you're doing right now, and spread the news, protect our pollinators and our ecosystem, unite. Let's do this all together. So here is the first of those links I promised to share, and these are really amazing websites with a lot of information. There's instructions on how to install habitat, pollinator lawn instructions, plant list, supplier lists, biocontrols. There's videos on some of these sites on how-tos and on pollinators and on plants. So if you have a cell phone, take a little snap of this one. And I have a second slide as well with plant lists, just plant lists. So here is my go-to for lists of all types. It goes, some are by soil type, by color, by geographic area. You can put your zip code in some of them. So I think we are going to get to our questions now. Thank you for joining me today. Remember to volunteer, participate, and support Pollinator Friendly Alliance, and invite all those pollinators into your backyard. I'm going to put the links back up to give you more time to copy those down. So shall we go to questions?
Sure, and can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
It's Jody at the library, and I just want to let everybody know that we are planning to email out a list of the links, so I will grab these and send a follow-up email to everyone so that you don't have to copy them all down separately. And I see you're asking about sending the information from the shade plant slide, so we will, I think we should be able to grab that too and send it out. We also did record, we have been recording, but since this is our initial foray into recording our meetings, we're still working on exactly how we will share that out, but we'll share that with you as it becomes available. All right, so some questions that were coming in as we were talking. Let's just go back up through here. So there are a lot of questions about plants, but both before the session and now. But at the beginning of the presentation, Shell was asking about ideal plantings along a lakeshore.
Okay, so there are a lot of lists that I'm going to suggest that you check out online, and specifically those that I shared with you, but I'll just mention a few. So sedges, of course, do really well along shorelines, and it's important to include those whether you're putting flowering forbs in or not, because they hold the shoreline together. But iris, coneflower, wild bergamot come to mind, and then of course the water lilies and big blue stem, little blue stem, and then again I just want to reiterate that sedges are amazing for shoreline, holding it together. So hope that helps, and then check out the the lists for sure. I'm going to go to the plant lists here.
Okay. Yeah, that looks great. And then someone else asked, how can we protect from pesticides if our neighbors use them?
Oh, yes, that's a hard one, isn't it? So one tip that is helpful in sort of educating neighbors and almost sort of guilting them into doing the right thing is to put a interpretive sign in your lawn. We do have some pollinator habitat yard signs, and you can contact me for those if you'd like. But just putting that little sign saying, you know, this is protected habitat and it's healthy for humans and for pollinators too, lets them know what you're up to. Also, I would want to know what they're using. So I'm not sure what your relationship is, but to ask them directly what chemical they are using. And there are lots of resources online where you can look up actual ingredients and what the toxicity of those are. I'm going to see if I can find one quick and I will share that with you in the chat. But, you know, asking them not to use a certain thing would be appropriate. It does go into your groundwater after all. So let me see if I can find this one right here. That's a good one. So this is a database. And if you can all see the chat, I will put that link in there. And a second one. Okay, what else we got, Jody?
Yeah, okay, kind of related. So is there a situation where you would use any pesticides or anything like that? Any ideas about getting rid of target insects safely?
So it's best if you must use a pesticide, use one that is organic. So for instance, neem oil or kaolin clay. We do have a resource on our website that lists, let me see if I can find it while we're talking, the alternatives to chemical pesticides. And remember to spray those when pollinators are not active, or put them on, apply them when they're not active, which means either in the evening or when it's chilly out, after the blooms are gone. So for instance, if you have an apple tree with kaolin clay, you can treat the apples themselves, but not the flowers. Also, to sort of look at your situation in a different way is helpful, because if you can tolerate some plant damage, for instance, organic apple growers consider 1/3 of their apples as usable. So some of those go to pests, some go to wildlife. See, I'm trying to find that list for you of alternatives to. So I hope that helps, but where is that list here? Okay, I'll keep looking for that. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that's good. And then another question is about starting a pollinator garter from a turf lawn. And I know you did cover that. You had a whole slide talking about that. But one question as I was watching that is, you started with scalping the lawn. Like, what does that mean really? How do you do that?
Okay, sure. So scalping means using your lawnmower on the lowest setting, so get as close to the grass as you can and just really cut it down to the ground, to the dirt, as close as you can get, so that there's some soil exposed. You want to get rid of what was there, the turf that was there. You could use a sod cutter, and actually remove the turf, but that is not, in my opinion, worth the effort, because there are weed seeds underneath that soil. So they're gonna probably come up similarly to if you just scalp it. What else we got, Jody?
And kind of related, she's asking what sort of maintenance is required for the upkeep of the pollinator garden? Does it have to be burned periodically? So once you get it going, I guess weed control, like how do you?
For a lawn or for a habitat?
Once you actually get a pollinator garden running, how do you maintain it? Do you need to burn it sometime?
Okay, so it depends on the size of the habitat. If it's a small garden or a home garden, it's hand weeding as you normally would. If it's a large section, like say a half acre or more, burning is one method of maintaining it, but it's very specific to the situation. So timed mowing is also used. For instance, in the Pollinator Park, which is just under an acre of prairie, we installed it the first year and then planted a cover crop that fall. And then the next spring, we mowed it about this time of year to allow the smaller plants an opportunity to grow, so they weren't outcompeted by the larger plants. So there's a whole process, and I hate to keep referring people to some of these resources, but in particular, the Xerces Pollinator Conservation and Habitat resources right here, the installation guides, it talks about maintenance, and it's really very complete. Also, this website at the university has a whole section on maintaining backyard and larger green space habitats as well.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I know you're covering a lot of information and there's a lot of details. So I think the links are really very helpful. Here's a couple more questions. One person asking about milkweed. She says, my milkweed doesn't bloom. Why and what can I do?
Yeah, milkweed is persnickety. I wonder, she probably has common milkweed. And then some of the other milkweeds are a little bit more tropical, but so they really like direct sunlight. But I don't know, the best you can do is just nurture it. It like I said, it's persnickety, and it doesn't always come up where you plant it, and also, as she's experiencing it, doesn't always bloom. You can check the soil type, and if it, you don't need to do a soil test necessarily, but if it's clay, maybe add some compost to that area. I see someone's asking about preen, and I'm going to put in the name of a new turf weed killer that I wouldn't suggest using everywhere, but to spot treat or top dress. It's a herbicide that is organic, and it handles creeping Charlie. It's called Fiesta. So
Great.
that answered preen question I see there.
Right. There's another one about chemicals related to fighting moles.
Okay, so yeah, I wouldn't put any kind of chemicals in my soil personally, and especially poison if that's what you're inferring for moles. Moles actually aerate the soil. I have heard of people putting traps underground for moles, and I know in our specific region in the Stillwater area, there's a lot of good habitat for moles, and there's a variety of different species that are living here. I have a lot of moles at my house, and I just leave them be. The one thing they do eat is tubers. So if you have plugs, or excuse me, bulbs, they might eat those. And so what I've done is I've just adjusted and I put those in raised beds, and they don't bother my plants. I don't know that question about Fiesta. Someone asked if Fiesta will harm clover. And I don't know the answer to that, sorry. But I would use it as a, you know, just try it in one little area and see how it does before you use it all over your lawn.
Great. We have Dan asking about harvesting seeds. He says, I've been harvesting seeds from my native plants and planting them in seed trays outside of our winter. Have been pretty successful. I was wondering if there are people that harvest seeds or offer seeds from their plants.
Yeah, so there's this organization out of Como Zoo called the Como Seed Library. Let's see if I can, and they group, collect, save, and trade seeds. Let's see if it comes up. Yes, there it is. So I'll put the link in the chat. All right, well, I am going to go back to this other list again. There's the plant list for those of you that didn't get it. And if I didn't get to your question today, if you want to email me separately, here's my email address. Should we take one more question? You got one, Jody?
Well, this last one is asking about Creeping Charlie, everyone's favorite. Is Creeping Charlie beneficial to the pollinators?
So yes, Creeping Charlie is one of those plants that actually is flowering right now. And I have a huge patch of it. I have a lot of land. So if it takes over a small section, I don't care. It smells good and it flowers, and it actually gets quite tall if you leave it to mature, and there are pollinators everywhere on it. So yeah, it is a pollinator plant, and we suggest leaving some of that in your lawn if you can tolerate it.
All right, thank you.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us today, and thanks to the Stillwater Library for hosting us. I'm glad you were all able to hang out before the rain comes. And maybe you still have a little time to get out there and garden before we get the much needed rain. So thanks again, and I think we're done, right, Jody?
Yep, that's it. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day.